At the altar, my fiancé never came. His mother, Margaret Vance, rose from the front pew in a silver sequin gown that cost more than my dress, tore off my cathedral-length lace veil, and poured a glass of dark red wine over my ivory silk gown. "You were just a placeholder," she laughed as the red stain spread like a wound across my chest. "A category, a filing system to keep his bed warm while he climbed." I collapsed to the marble floor, the cold stone biting through my ruined dress. But as 400 guests watched me bleed crimson under the church's stained glass, a voice behind me, steady, unhurried, and cold, cut through the ambient noise. "Don't fall apart. Not when you're about to win." Julian Thorne, my fiancé's billionaire boss, stepped forward, kneeling in the wine-soaked marble without a thought for his $11,000 suit, and looked me in the eyes before turning to the silent room. "Marry me instead." The organ had stopped at exactly 2:14 p.m., and I know this because as an ICU nurse, my brain had automatically gone into trauma mode, counting, measuring, and trying to diagnose the situation before the patient flatlined. To understand how I, a 31-year-old nurse with a graduate degree, ended up on my knees in a blood-red wedding dress, you have to understand the calculation of the Vance family. It started 18 months ago when Ryan Vance walked into the ER with a superficial scratch on his arm and a structural ego. He was a junior analyst at Titan Corporation, charming in that specific way that makes you feel chosen, remembering obscure details about my life like trophies of attention. But behind the flowers and the smiles was Margaret, a woman who treated our relationship like a board meeting she wasn't invited to. At our first dinner, she poured me a smaller glass of wine than everyone else and documented her verdict with questions about my salary and background. When the proposal came on a rooftop, I didn't know Margaret had selected and paid for the ring. 3 months before the wedding, she began systematically dismantling my life, overriding my florist, replacing my cake, and restructuring the seating chart so my colleagues from the hospital were shoved into the back of the room. Ryan's only response was, "She means well, I can't fight her." And I was foolish enough to think can't was different from won't. I noticed small things, Ryan taking his phone into the bathroom, working late for his boss Julian Thorne, but it wasn't until 2 weeks before the wedding that I overheard the truth. Standing in my scrubs after a night shift, I heard Ryan whisper into the phone, "Mother, it's handled. She doesn't know anything about Sterling." I told myself I'd misheard, that I was just tired, and I let Danielle, my maid of honor and a trauma surgeon, zip me into my dress on the big day, smiling at a version of myself I no longer recognized. Back at the altar, Margaret had used a microphone to announce that Ryan was across town with Isabella Sterling, a woman with breeding and money. She ripped the veil from my head with such force the comb tore my scalp, and as the wine soaked through my silk, I heard people in the back actually laugh. But Julian Thorne, the man who never sleeps, the man rooms reorganize themselves around, had been watching. He pulled me to my feet and reminded the room of June 2nd, 3 years ago on I-95. He had been trapped in a car fire, bleeding and conscious, watching dozens of people take photos and drive on, until one nurse stopped, broke the window with her bare hands, and used her own clothes to pack his chest wounds before disappearing. "I have been looking for her for 3 years, he said, looking at me with a focus that stripped away the humiliation. Then he turned his surgical precision on the Vances. Isabella Sterling didn't exist. She was Cara Wells, an actress Julian had hired 11 weeks ago as a test for Ryan. Ryan had sold me out in just 22 hours for a fake merger and a fabricated fortune. Julian had recorded every conversation, every betrayal, and Ryan's position at Titan had been terminated at 9 a.m. that morning. When Ryan finally sprinted into the church, tie crooked and eyes darting with calculation, Julian told him to take a seat in the back because he was just a guest now. Ryan tried to play the victim, blaming his mother's pressure, but I saw the truth. He wasn't grieving for me. He was calculating his own loss. I grabbed Julian's lapels and kissed him, an impulse of pure fury and release, and we told Father Gregory to say the words right then and there. Ryan was escorted out screaming by Julian's security. In the bridal suite afterward, Julian didn't presume victory. He simply handed me a garment bag containing a crimson red silk dress he had commissioned 12 weeks ago, after he confirmed I was the woman from the highway. "I hoped you'd never need it," he said. "But I wanted you to have something waiting." 14 months later, Margaret Vance's unhurried elegance has been replaced by legal fees. She settled out of court for a significant sum after Julian's forensic psychologists and lawyers filed civil fraud charges. Ryan is living in his mother's house in Connecticut after his luxury lease ended, and I don't think about him much. The video of our wedding was viewed 11 million times, and the internet consensus was clear. The nurse who stood her ground in a wine-soaked dress had earned her seat at the head table. Julian and I married properly on a Tuesday in October, a quiet dinner afterward where he finally saw me laugh, a sound he'd been waiting 3 years to hear. I still work trauma at St. Augustine because the work doesn't care about your bank account or your ruined dress. It only cares about the body in crisis. I come home to a man who knows my silences and hands me tea without asking for a performance. Margaret sent an apology letter, but I let my lawyer handle it. Some wounds are better off cleaned and closed. Ryan was the one who thought I was the driver, but he never realized that in the end, the driver is the one who chooses the destination.